My name is Ninad Garware. I'm a customer success manager here at UpCodes. I'm a licensed architect. I practiced architecture on the East Coast for close to a decade before moving to the West Coast and currently in San Francisco. I was a PA at HOK right before I joined UpCodes, and I used UpCodes a lot during my time as PA at HOK, and that led me to working here. My role here is essentially to onboard, train, work with customers as they adopt UpCodes and they start using it across the life cycle of the product, make sure that you're getting the best value out of your subscription, and really help you make the right choices and learn more about the product through your subscription. Some of the projects you see on the screen are projects that I've worked on from entitlements to construction. A lot of my projects on the East Coast were focused on multifamily residential buildings, a lot of mixed use work right there. Also, my work on the West Coast was focused on some corporate real estate. So I worked on office buildings, core and shell commercial buildings, lab and office buildings, really a wide range of projects that I've worked on over the past 10 to 15 years. So really, I'm going to bring all of this experience to the table as I help people onboard and use UpCodes. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Feel free to ask questions via the Q&A button in your Zoom window. We have a dedicated time slot at the end of this presentation to answer as many of your questions as we can. You'll receive a recording of this webinar for you to reference in case you have to hop off early, although we hope you can stay. And we'd love to hear what else you'd like to learn about and how we can improve future webinars. Keep an eye out for a webinar survey. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about UpCodes as a platform and everything it has to offer. We're going to identify pain points that you generally face during the code research process. And these are pain points collected through user interviews, as well as from my own experience as a practicing architect, and how you can address those pain points. We're then going to talk about UpCodes specific solutions. And our focus today will be on the Code Calculator and Copilot. So I'll be doing a demo of both those products live on the call. And then we'll also reserve some time for Q&A at the end. So UpCodes is a comprehensive code compliance platform. Since you probably all know that. Since you started, we've seen a significant uptick in usage and adoptions across the AC industry. UpCodes lets you easily research, collaborate, and calculate code requirements efficiently. It modernizes code compliance, which is historically a pretty outdated process, and is the perfect solution for anyone involved in the compliance lifecycle, from design to construction to occupancy of a building, including plan review, inspection, and customer service. With UpCodes, you get access to over 1,700 state and city codes, along with over 180,000 amendments across 77 jurisdictions, with over 1,200 detailed code diagrams. Our content team updates 7,000 code sections on average each month and monitors over 500 AHA websites. UpCodes is an extremely versatile platform and is aimed at reducing the burden of code compliance that is on your shoulders. Let's begin by first identifying the pain points that resulted in the development of UpCodes. So the code research process, I'm sure a lot of you identify these pain points in maybe your day-to-day process or project based on project basis. But sourcing content can be laborious. It can be time consuming. You may have hard copies in the library in the office. You may be searching through HTA websites. It's really not a very efficient process. Collaboration may be ad hoc, not inclusive. You may have discussions with someone on the call. That information may not necessarily get relayed down to junior staff. So there's some loss of nuances in project communication there. Code research documentation may not be streamlined. You may be doing it on an Excel file. You may be doing it in a Revit sheet. There's no consolidated way of doing it. Some firms do have a setup, but a lot of times those are outdated systems. Someone has to keep managing it. Also, code research, using multiple platforms is inefficient, right? You use Teams, you use Smartsheet, you use Revit, you use all of these different platforms. So it's not really efficient to manage your code compliance process on all of them. Manual calculations may be incorrect, in which case it's completely incorrect, or it may be inaccurate when you're really looking for the nuance of the numbers. And the last point is something I relate to very, very strongly. It's just tracing old project decisions is really cumbersome. I've been on projects that lasted 4 or 5 years, and it's really hard to go back to year one and really trace why a decision was made. And that may come up during CA, it may come up during inspections. really, it may come up at any point during the project lifecycle. So it's really important to have a way to document all of those decisions. So how does UpCodes help you do this? UpCodes, the primary product that UpCodes has to offer is the code library. We have code content as well as illustrations that go along with that content that help you understand the intent of the code. We also have the ability to create projects where you can save project-specific code content. We also, have the code calculators, which are essentially project-specific. They are jurisdiction-specific that help you quickly calculate code requirements. And recently, we also developed Copilot, which is our AI tool, which helps you answer code questions. It can help you generate a checklist. It can do a lot of things. So for today, we are going to focus primarily on automating your compliance process. And by automating, I do mean that it's a tool that you can use in your compliance process. It's something that you always will need to be in charge of, but using these tools will hopefully streamline that process for you and make it a little easier. So let's talk about the Code Calculator. The Code Calculator is a project-specific tool which you can use to verify code requirements for your project. It is jurisdiction-specific. It integrates any local amendments for jurisdictions that we host in UpCodes. It helps you quickly assess the impact of project changes or decisions. It helps you It helps you develop design options. It also helps you extract all this information that has calculated and put it on your Revit sheets or your documentation that you're submitting for a plan application. And also helps you collaborate. It helps you share all this information, either with an owner, or code consultant, someone you're working with internally or externally within your own firm. The Copilot is essentially a tool that is non-project specific. So it's a tool that can be used outside of a project, but it can be used to ask project-specific questions. We do ask that you select a jurisdiction and the code here when you use Copilot, because that essentially helps you narrow down the responses it generates. You can use it in multiple ways. You can ask it a code question to get a response. You can ask it to generate a code checklist for things that you're trying to design. You can ask it to do some basic calculations like parking spaces, for example. You can save Copilot responses to your project, which helps you tie into decision making and have that answer verified by a senior technical staff member. And really, there's multiple ways in which you can use Copilot. But I will show you a few ways today on today's call, just so you're aware of all the capabilities of Copilot. So for today's call, we're going to set up a sample project. We're going to start with Code Calculator, talk about how we can set it up, talk about workarounds, talk about ways in which you can use it at an initial phase of the project when you may not have all of the information, right through layering on information as the project develops through different stages. The project we're going to build today is a 6-story mixed-use development. I'm going to select New York City jurisdiction and the code year 2022. Here are some plans that are developed. So it's a through-lot building. It spans across lots, so there's streets on all sides of the project. There is some retail space on the ground floor, along with some residential lobbies that are broken up, and maybe some office spaces as well on the north side of the street, as you can see there. It's 6 stories, so the ground floor is mixed use. The second floor is more of parking. It has some cores going through the building with some empty space. And then level 3 onwards, it's primarily a double-loaded corridor with residential units on both sides. It sort of snakes around the plan, as you can see there. Going to hop over to the platform now and talk about how you can set up a project and jump straight into the Code Calculator. There's a lot you can do within the project, but my focus today is going to be on Code Calculator. To set up a new project, you can click in to a new project and type in the name of the project here. You can select jurisdiction as well as the code here for that project. Now, this is important because the Code Calculator uses the building codes and the plumbing codes for that specific jurisdiction and that code here to check for compliance. There are also some other related nuances with selecting the jurisdiction and code here, but for today's presentation and for the Code Calculator, that is why it's important to select a jurisdiction. I'm going to go ahead and create a project. You reach your project homepage. You have your bookmark code sections here. You have your Code Calculator here. You have bookmark Copilot answers, and you have the ability to share your project with someone. For now, I'm going to go ahead and share it with a coworker of mine. Send him an invite. Mitch will now receive an email from me with a link to join the project. If he's an UpCodes Premium subscriber, he will be able to join the project. If not, he will have to buy a subscription and join the project. The code calculator, as you can see on the right here, checks for compliance under 4 categories. So that's heights and areas, egress, fire ratings, and plumbing. So it's 15 different calculators from what you can see here, but it really uses data from you or from the design to check for compliance. In order to input the data, you need to click on code calculators on the left, click on inputs, and then click on the first category, which is heights and areas. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do this manually right here. What I am going to do is I'm going to pull up a project that I've already created, and that project relates to the floor plans here. So I'm going to go back to code calculators, click on inputs, and click on heights and areas. And within heights and areas, you'll notice that there are different subsections. So there's a subsection for building composition, which is essentially the composition of your building in terms of levels, the kind of groups or occupancies that exist in those levels, heights, etc. If you scroll down the list, you'll also see another subsection called general building information, building perimeter and site information, building uses, parking details, and fire safety. Now, this is where the integration of local amendments comes into play. If you are working in a jurisdiction that has additional code requirements, there'll be additional categories that show up here. We will need to answer all of those questions in order to run a full compliance check. For this particular project, I'm going to go back to my plan now. On level 1, as you can see, you have retail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You also have a retail exit corridor at the back of these 4 retail spaces. Let's start with the retail spaces. So I've input the space. Actually, before that, I've input the height. So it's an 18 floor, top of slab. There's retail 1, retail 2, 3, 4. There's a retail exit corridor. Now, the name of the space can directly relate to the way you input in the plan. You have an occupancy assigned to that particular space. That's M. Now, if I am an experienced architect, I know that occupancy group M applies to my retail space here. In most jurisdictions, we also offer an occupancy type guide, which is a questionnaire which helps you narrow down the kind of occupancy you can assign to a space. It is not available for the New York City Building Code of 2022, but it will soon be rolled out. Once you assign an occupancy to that space, you also need to assign a functional space, which you can do by selecting a functional space from this list here. You can then input a gross square footage number. In this case, it is 3,500. I'm going to zoom in there a little bit. It's 3,500. And if the occupancy is allowed to, if you're allowed to calculate occupant loads based on net square footage, you can also input that number here. Now, it's important to know that if I do not assign a functional space to a particular occupancy, I'm able to manually override these numbers here, and it's not able to automatically calculate an occupant load, but I can always manually input it. This is great because it's really fluid. When you're in the initial phases of a project, you may not necessarily have all of this information. You can do all of this manually. And then once you start assigning occupancies and functional space to spaces, you can essentially have it automated for you. So the minute I assign a functional space, so this is on the ground floor, so I'm going to click that. You can see that the net square footage field was grayed out. And that's because the code requires me to use the gross square footage to calculate the occupant load. You can also see the occupant load factor that it is using based on the building code requirements to calculate the occupant load. So I've input my spaces as retail 1, 2, 3, 4. There's retail exit corridor. Now, a small nuance to corridors, stairs, any sort of exit components that we're using is that we need to assign certain exit components to certain spaces, because that's what UpCodes calculator requires to check for compliance. You can do that by entering the information down here. So these corridors, stairways, and exits, these 3 components are used to input spaces that are used in the egress. So for the retail exit corridor that I had running in the back of these retail exit spaces, that is an exit component, which I can then attach to the retail spaces. So retail 1, when I go to this column on the right here, I can click on it, and now I can connect the egress components to that space. I scroll down the list. I'm connecting retail 1 to retail 1 exit, which is a sidewalk exit. but I'm also connecting it to the retail exit corridor, which is an exit component at the back of the retail space. You can attach as many exits as you need to a space based on your design. I'm going to do the same thing for retail 2. So I've connected to retail 2 exit as well as the retail exit corridor 1, which is at the back of the space, and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the corridor, I would input the corridor as an additional space here and assign it a 0 occupant load. But I need to do this because I need the gross square footage to be used in the calculation when we do the total gross square footage area calculation. So I've input that space here as well. So going ahead, we have some MEP space here. We have lobbies, we have parking ramp, some office space as well as retail. So I've gone ahead and edited those. So there's lobby east and west, there's retail 5, there's a parking ramp, office 1, office 2, and retail. I also input the gross square footage numbers as needed. These are all of the exits that I had to manually input, and then I had to connect them to the spaces here. All right, so level 1 is done. Going back to the plans, level 2 essentially is just parking with residential cores going through the building. Going back to my inputs page, I have parking, S2, functional space assigned, square footage assigned, and an occupant load based on the occupant load factor. I also have stairs specific for parking. It could be multiple stairs or it could be one stair based on my layout. There's MEP, there's residential cores that go through the building, and also 0 occupant load for those cores going through the building. There's also the stairways that I added here. There's no exits because this is on a higher floor, so there's no exits that go directly out. Going up the building, we are now in the residential space. So it's a double loaded corridor. So essentially all of the units are laid out along the corridor. You also have 3 cores as well as some MEP space. Now, the way I have done it is I've grouped together all of my residential units. And the reason being that I'm in an early stage of a project, I just want to get a quick number. So I've just combined all of those units together and given it one GSF number. Now, as I start adding new ones to the project, I can go ahead and break that up and keep adding units based on the layout. But for now, I just have units to the north of the corridor and units to the south of the corridor. You could also just do a single units line and assign the MEP space as an accessory to it. And then you can also have a corridor square footage assigned for the corridor, the double loaded corridor. You then attach the space to the exit. So in this case, my double loaded corridor connects me to my stairs. So my residential units are actually connected to the corridor. Residential units on the north are connected to the corridor. The MEP space is connected to the corridor. And my corridor itself is connected to the 3 stairs that service the residential units. Again, there's no exit on this floor. You'll notice that when I go back to my plans, my footprint is exactly the same across these 3 levels. And so I can actually do repeated stories in the code calculator. That's if you have the exact same footprint going up. So it's levels 3, levels 4, levels 5, and I should increase this to level 6. Each floor is 10 feet tall. And if you have footprints that do change, you'd have to add stories and then change the square footage and the composition based on your design. You can also move spaces around if you need to. And this is useful if you need to attach a space as an accessory or a mezzanine based on your design. You can also add spaces as you need to, or delete them if you want to. And the same thing applies to corridors, stairways, and exits. All right, so now that I have input the design information, or rather the building composition information, I actually need to scroll down the list and answer a couple more questions. Like I said, there's additional categories. There's, there are some more questions in the building compositions category. So there's, what is the average height of the highest roof surface above grade plane? There's a certain field input that you need to provide. Is a building in a fire district? No. Are the occupancy of the building fully fire separated? No. And these are all basically based on the design. Going down to general building information, this is where you can select type of construction for the building. And within the main calculator that I'm showing you right now, we have a really cool tool. I call it a mini calculator. But if you're not too sure about what type of construction you can select, or you're just doing very rough design options and you're trying to understand what's happening, you can actually use the construction type guide. So just scroll down the list here, click on construction type guide, and that will bring up a mini calculator within the main calculator, which helps you modify your design parameters and will let you know what types of construction are compliant and not compliant. This is great if you're doing design options or you're really trying to work out or what type of construction you want to assign to your project in terms of cost or owner requirements, or something like that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip the building perimeter and site information, but that does help you compute allowable area, fire distance, rating requirements, etc. I'm going to go ahead and answer some additional questions about the building use. Parking details, my parking garage is enclosed, and fire safety, what is the floor level height of the highest occupied floor above the lowest level of the fire department vehicle access? So I provided a number for that. Once I'm done inputting information in the building composition category, I can click on next module. And when I do that, you'll notice that this has moved down to egress. Now, while the form may look like it's the same, it has actually additional questions that need to be answered for the UpCodes code calculator to check for compliance with egress requirements. Since this is a pre-populated project, all the questions have already been answered. I'm going to go ahead and hit next module. And it's the same with fire ratings and with plumbing. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and view requirements. And you can hit save and view requirements at any point during the process of inputting information. Essentially, when the green check mark on the left shows up here, it means that the code calculator has sufficient information to check for compliance. It doesn't necessarily mean that design is compliant, but it means that it has sufficient information. So now that I am on my summary page, I can see all of the information that I've input, the project info, the jurisdiction, the code year, all of this data that I had input based on my layout here. And the actual code checks start happening below this line here. So I'm the first category, that's heights and areas. So any condition that is compliant will show us as just a standard box, but any condition that is non-compliant will be highlighted to you by UpCodes with this red box here. You may notice that my egress, fire ratings, and plumbing fields do not have the check mark, and that's because there's probably some information missing from my inputs page. So before I talk about the entire project compliance check, I'm actually going to go and re-input my information in here. And to do that, I click on Edit Inputs. And then looks like I was missing an occupant load there. I'm going to hit next module. Scroll up the list to see if there's something else I did not answer. Save and view requirements. And now you can see that I needed to answer that one particular question or input the occupant load for that one particular space. And now it has sufficient information to check for compliance. Going back up, I'm going to click on project info. So it takes me up to the top of the list. Here's all the information that I input in the calculator, along with information like the sprinkler type of construction. And now it's telling me that this particular condition is not compliant. For every condition, whether it is compliant or non-compliant, UpCodes offers you the ability to review the calculations. And that's a really important and critical step because you don't want to go by what it has given you on first pass. You definitely want to check your calculations. In addition to calculations, you'll also want to review any footnotes that we've included here and make sure that they are applicable to your specific project. So it does say here that my design building area is about 388,000 square feet. My allowable building area is 90,000 square feet. So where did I go wrong? I'm going to click see calculation. And that will bring up a window with a step-by-step breakdown of how UpCodes has reached a conclusion that this design is not compliant. Within that breakdown, you'll also have hyperlinks to code sections that it has used in calculating the compliance. So when I click on that, it will open up another window and it'll take me there. You can scroll down this list and you can see that the allowable area must be greater than or equal to the total design area, and it's non-compliant here. Now, I did notice that I do not have a horizontal separation in this building. I do want to qualify for unlimited area. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my project inputs. And let's say I want to add horizontal building separation here. I select the right provision. I'm going to select a type of construction above the separation and the sprinkler system for that particular type of construction. And then below the separation, any options that I cannot choose are grayed out. I can only choose type 1A in FPA 13. Now, even within this field, you have an option to run the construction type guide where you can modify your parameters to see what type of construction is either compliant or non-compliant. Just a quick caveat on this. It is not bi-directional. So if you are making changes to inputs in this field, it does not get relayed back to your inputs in the code calculator. So if you have reached a condition that you're happy with, I will just take a snapshot of that, make sure that you know which condition is the compliant one, and then transfer these project parameters back in the project inputs. All right. And now you can see that that particular notification has gone away. The allowed area is unlimited area. My design square footage about the separation is 222,000 square feet. There's also things like building height, building stories. Again, for each of these, you can see the calculation along with a link to the code section that is used in running that calculation. There's also occupant loads, then exits per space, exit access travel distance. You know, for some conditions, it does calculate requirements for you. So for example, in terms of building area, it will tell you what the allowed area is, what the designed area is. And that's because it's basing it off your inputs. If you do look down this list here, in some conditions, it does tell you the maximum exit access travel distance needs to be 200, but it has not calculated that because it doesn't have access to your drawings. So you need to make sure that when you're designing, you comply with these requirements. There's also dead end corridor length, corridor width, fire ratings. Firewall ratings, fire area separation ratings, corridor fire distance ratings. One quick caveat as well is that we support horizontal building separations, but we do not support vertical ones. So we do not support firewalls. They need to be built as separate projects. And plumbing fixture counts. Now, when you're done with when you're done with this calculation, you can scroll up to the top, and let's say you want to share this information with someone. You can actually download this entire summary, either as a PDF or an Excel file. Downloading it as a PDF will download it in an UpCodes generated format. If you do want to customize that format, I would definitely recommend downloading it as an Excel file. The Excel file is a very simple Excel file. It does not contain calculated values. So if you are making changes to your design parameters, I definitely recommend going back to the UpCodes code calculator inputs and then changing those parameters, running the code calculation again, and then downloading the code sheet. One note about these calculations also is that when you click on C calculation, you can actually export this entire calculation as a PDF and share it with someone. So for example, if you receive a plan check comment about a certain calculation, you can actually export it directly from UpCodes and share it with the building department to defend your design. Or vice versa, or if an owner is asking questions about a certain design decision, you can show them the calculations. You no longer have to do it manually. It's all on UpCodes, and it's streamlined for every type of project you're going to be working on. All right. So that was a lot, but feel free to jump in there, test it out. I'm going to go back to this plan here. And I do want to talk about Copilot. So actually, I'm going to hop back here, go back home, and then go back to this. All right. So that was Code Calculator, and using Code Calculator to sort of automate at least a part of your design calculation process. The next tool you can use is Copilot, and Copilot is our AI-powered tool. Some of you may have access through your subscription. It is a part of the professional subscription, so if you're not part of it, you have about 3 free questions, but feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about updating. Ways you can use Copilot. You can ask it a code-related question. a very specific question about your design. You can ask it for a summary, explain to me the differences between different types of construction. You can request an explanation of the building code. You can also ask it to perform quick calculations, something about parking spaces. You can ask it to find specific code requirements or exceptions, which previously was through experience or through really spending a lot of time in the code. You can also ask it to generate a checklist of code requirements. So that's really many different ways in which you can use Copilot. Now, what I'm going to do for this example is I'm going to go back to the platform and talk about ways in which you can access Copilot, and also run a demo to show you what kind of questions you can ask it and how it generates responses. So to access Copilot, you can click on the Copilot button on the left. You'll notice that there are certain filters that show up on the left here. A quick note about Copilot and how it works is that you may have heard about ChatGPT or Bing or Bard. Copilot is very different from all of those, and in the sense that it is trained on specifically the content that we host here at UpCodes. So all of the content that you find in our codes library is what it's trained on. So it's very construction specific. It's not trained on all of the internet. And also, because our content team keeps that content up to date, day in and day out, we have a team that is dedicated to doing just that. Copilot has access to all that information right away as soon as it goes live on the website. So it's very focused and very specific to the construction industry. Selecting a jurisdiction and selecting a code year in this list will also help you narrow down the responses it generates. It's going to be more specific about your project. And then, you can also select a building type. This is optional. You don't necessarily need to do it. Now, let's say for this particular, I'm just going to say I'm going to design another project. I'm going to still select the New York City jurisdiction in the current code year. I'm going to go ahead and type in a question here. I'm designing a 10-story office building that has certain users in it. On level 8, I have an office space with an outdoor terrace. I just want to know what kind of occupancies I need to be aware of while designing this particular project. Copilot will generate a response for me based on the New York City building codes, because that's what my jurisdiction is. It will also list out in a bullet format or a numbered format the kind of occupancies I need to be aware of. But while it does that, it also includes a list of any code sections that I need to be aware of, either as it has been used as a part of the response, or that I just need to review to check if it's compliant, if it's applicable to my project. So here it is. Here it has generated a response. It's an office building, so there's business group B. There's probably some retail space in there as well. So there's mercantile group M. There's parking. There's public space, which may be assembly. And then here are the links to all of the code sections that it has used in generating the response, or that it thinks will be useful for you in reviewing the response. What's nice is you can actually save Copilot responses to projects by clicking on Save to Project. Save it to the project we just created. And that way you can actually tie it to decision making. And I'll show you how that is done. I'm going to go back to home and open up the project that I was working on. Here are all of the Copilot questions that I've asked it for this specific project. I'm going to click on the response that was generated. And I'm going to ask Mitch. I guess Mitch is not a part of this project. I can add a comment here. But actually, what I will do is I'll go back to the dashboard for this particular project. I'll add Mitch to it. I'm going to go back to my Copilot response. I'm going to say, hey, Mitch. Mitch can then respond to my comment here and say, hey, this looks good. I think we should proceed. And I can design my building based on the response that has been generated. Or I could, start using the code calculator based on the response that it has generated. Going back to Copilot here, I'm going to ask it, actually, I'm going to ask it the same question again. And one thing I do want to note is Copilot is a tool. It's not going to replace architects. It's not going to replace code consultants. At the end of the day, architects or design professionals are the ones that are stamping the drawings. So make sure that you review the responses, make sure that the responses are accurate. That's one of the reasons why we added the feature to be able to save responses to projects, because we want users to actually confirm that that is actually specific to their project. The other thing I wanted to note is, okay, once Copilot has generated a response, I can ask it a follow-up question. And it remembers a previous response. So it sort of builds on and layers on to what it knows about a project. And that's why the responses it generates are as good as the prompt or the question that you ask it. Now, we are building in the ability to be able to connect Copilot and Code Calculator. So once you have already input all of your Code Calculator information, building uses, square footages, exits, egress components, all of that information, and then you ask Copilot a question specific to that project, it has all of this information that it is pulling from. It has the building codes. It's going to pull information from there and generate a response. So once we do that, it will give you a lot more precise responses than it does right now. However, a workaround for that right now is to ask Copilot to, have a continuous way in which you're going to ask questions, but also give Copilot as much information about your design as possible. Another alternative to that is to ask Copilot a list of assumptions it has made in generating a response. And so it lists out those assumptions for you. You can sort of fill in the blanks and correct those assumptions, and the answer will get more and more precise. If you're not happy with the answer, you can actually challenge Copilot. You can say, hey, this response is not correct, and here's the reason why. And Copilot actually regenerate the response based on your challenge. Do feel free to rate this answer. We take this very seriously. Our team actually reviews qualities of answers that Copilot generates. Again, it's an AI tool. It's still in its infancy. We released it about a couple of months ago. Hopefully a year, 2 years from now, it'll become really good. Again, it will not replace professionals, but it'll at least supplement your skills and allow you to focus your time on other issues. While you're browsing through the code library, you can actually use Copilot within this view as well. When you hover over a specific code section, you notice a small toolbar that comes up. And apart from all of the tools that you see here, the one at the end is called Copilot. When you click on that, you can ask a specific code question related to that section. You can ask it to explain that section to you. You could ask it to perform a calculation or summarize that section for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Summarize. And what it does is essentially it'll type in the prompt for you for that specific code, for that specific jurisdiction, code year, and that specific code book. And it'll also provide you a link to that section. And this is great for, if not in the professional setting, if you're studying for licensure, or if you receive a question from an owner or a client or from someone about a specific project, and they want a sort of a easy to digest response, you can use Copilot for that as well. I actually want to type in another question. Summarize the differences between type 1A and type 2A construction. Provide an exhaustive answer. Some of these prompts will help you generate more informative answers, provide an exhaustive answer, list all of the sources you've used in generating the response, list all the assumptions you've made. Like all of these smaller prompts will help you generate a more powerful response. And yeah, so this, along with your code calculator, the mini calculator within the code calculator for type of construction, you can really use it to justify a certain type of construction or why you want to use it on a project. I'm going to go ahead and save it to a project and save. What Copilot also does is it pulls out any diagrams specific to the response that it thinks you should review while you're reviewing the response. And so the way you can use it is you can pull up a diagram. And when you use diagrams, we're going to do a whole webinar on diagrams on September 21st and on code content in general. But when you do pull up a diagram, it actually includes hyperlinks to any code sections that are using that specific diagram. So when you pulled up a diagram, let's say I pulled up this diagram, I can actually click on that hyperlink. It'll take me to that particular code section, and I can save that to my project as well. All right. So that being said, that's all I had to present today. There's really a lot to unpack in the Code Calculator and Copilot. Feel free to test it out. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We are happy to jump on a call with you, or if you want to add as a collaborator on a project, we can hop in the project for you and see how we can help you out. But for now, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions we may have received during the call. Gabriella?
Thanks, Anand. So yeah, it's been a little quiet in the Q&A chat. So what I did for the time being is just to come up with some commonly asked questions that we've received regarding Copilot and the code calculator that I've received from users, throughout the past couple of weeks or so. So the first question that came up quite often is it possible to change the jurisdiction, code year, or make edits to a project and/or code calculator after it has been created?
Yeah, great question. So when you do create a project, again, Code Calculator is a project-specific feature. So after you created a project, you can hop into the project settings. You can change the jurisdiction for a project, and that will essentially change the jurisdiction for the entire project. So anything you do with the Code Calculator will now be specific to the new jurisdiction. Any questions that you may ask for that specific project in Copilot, though, will not, because Copilot is not a project-specific tool. However, once we do tie in the ability to connect Copilot and Code Calculator, it will start generating more project-specific responses.
Perfect, thank you. And then one last question too regarding Copilot. Is it possible to save Copilot answers to a project? And if so, can these answers be exported?
Yes, the answers cannot be exported, but they can definitely be saved to projects. So when you generate a Copilot response, you have a small bookmark icon that shows up on the top right. You can actually click on that just as I showed you and save it to a particular project.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like we've gotten a few more, so maybe we can answer one or two that we just received. And for anyone that has any further questions, you can definitely reach out to us at support@up.codes. More than happy to assist there. One we just received is there a PDF manual or a set of tutorials for the code calculator?
We have a couple of videos available online. We also have some basic tutorials available on our website, but we are building on them. And we intend to have more of these webinars to help you with the code calculator. Again, as Gabriella mentioned, we are available to support you. We have received requests from users to jump in a project, help out resolve issues, and try and understand how the code calculator works in detail. So we are happy to do that as well if you reach out to us at support@up.codes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Nanad.
All right. If there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We will be happy to answer them for you. But other than that, thank you for joining me on this call, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.